Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Emerson has some new polling out for the June 2026 primary for the California gubernatorial race. And when you and I talked about this race back in April, it was a different race because there was a lot of chatter, a lot of excitement for someone who had not officially jumped into the race, that person being former Vice President Kamala Harris. She did announce last week, though, that she is not throwing her hat in the ring. So to start off the conversation, how exactly does that announcement change things?
And Brittany, that does certainly change things. With Harris out of the mix now, we see that Katie Porter is now the leader of the race, 18%. That's followed by Republican Steve Hilton, who is a relative newcomer to the field with 12%. And then everyone else is under 10%. So Kamala Harris being out of the race, that's obviously a major factor here. It opens it up to really several Democrats. I think Republicans will probably coalesce around one or a few candidates. We see a little bit of that here with Hilton, but the race definitely got more interesting as a result of Harris staying out.
It definitely did. And when you and I were talking back in April, it essentially looked like Harris's race to lose. She was the front runner at 31% when you polled her in the race. And Katie Porter was in a distant second at 8% there. Where are you seeing Harris's support go? Because 31%, that is a sizable chunk of voters.
That is a sizable chunk, and I wouldn't say that Harris's support has gone to any one place necessarily. We do see that Porter is posting a lead here, and that's specifically among a few groups. One I'd like to shout out, though, is among the most educated, the folks with an advanced degree beyond bachelor's. She's earning 35% of the vote. That's not necessarily any sort of monolith there, but that is something that's boosting her. It's surprising, though, that no other Democrats in the poll are really able to crack that 10% mark. Democrats like Villaraigosa, Kounalakis, neither of them are getting above 10%. So, I do think that this field is still open. I think that there's certainly a window there for someone to potentially break through on that moderate Democrat side. I mean, remember, we saw polling in New York City leading up to Election Day that showed Cuomo winning the first round ballot. That ended up not happening. We could end up seeing a so-called moderate Mamdani here.
And undecided is winning here by a lot at 38%. It's winning by a landslide. But who is this undecided helping more? Because I wouldn't say that any of these California names in the gubernatorial race are necessarily household names. Arguably, one of the most popular is Katie Porter. She's a former congresswoman, and she had some viral moments on social media, but it's not exactly like it was when former Vice President Harris was in, because she obviously was the only true household name there.
Yeah, and right now, I don't know that the undecided is necessarily helping anyone. We do see that that Steve Hilton is picking up some support here just by entering the race, I think. He's already winning 30% of Republicans. So I think that that vote will end up consolidating pretty significantly. Like I said, Democrats have some real choices to make here. And, as of right now, none of these down ballot, these candidates who are further down in the roster, none of them are really picking up any steam. So Porter has clearly gained as a result of Harris exiting the race or never entering in the first place. But like I said, I think there is space here for some of these other candidates. We'll see over the next 10 or so months. But as these campaigns kick into gear, they're really going to be going after some of those undecided voters. And as you said, there are quite a lot of them right now.
To that point that it seems like Katie Porter's one of the only candidates to be picking up steam, how competitive is this race shaping out to be 10 months out from the primary?
So I do think that this will be a competitive race. Obviously, we have candidates of all parties on this ballot. Once we get down to the top two, I do see a Democrat winning this race. I don't think it's necessarily competitive for a Republican candidate, barring a real splintering of the Democratic field. We see in the generic ballot that Democrats are ahead in California by over 20 points. So, I don't see it necessarily being terribly competitive for Republicans, but I do see it being competitive for different lanes of Democrats and independents.
And that could mean that it could come down to the issue. So I am curious, what are some of those top issues facing voters in California?
And as usual, Brittany, the economy is the top issue. It's at 30%. Next, we see housing, which I think really ties in with the economy here, 19%. Immigration at 15%, and then threats to democracy at 13%. Now, I will say that economy number is down from 40 in April, and immigration is up a bit, about 7 points from April as well. We also see that housing is much higher in California. That number, those folks who say that housing is their top issue, that is much higher than it is nationally. I think some of that is to be expected in California, but I think that's worth shouting out. And also, we see that folks in their 60s, that is one of their top issues. They are the most likely to say that it is their top issue. Take that for what you will. But clearly, there is a major housing and economy issue in California.
And so while the economy is number one, I think an issue that could really go hand in hand there is President Trump's tariff plan. He unveiled tariffs. He's threatened, paused, restarted a trade war and trade wars, really, with dozens of nations since he began his second term. And just this week, the reciprocal tariffs on dozens of nations officially went into effect. So how do voters in California feel about these tariffs?
And as you might expect in a fairly democratic state like California, it's about 3 to 1 of folks who say that tariffs are a tax on the consumer versus a tax on foreign countries. So folks clearly are not seeing tariffs as something that is necessarily punishing other countries solely, but they see it as something that they're going to feel more at home. And as you might expect, there's very much a partisan split there. Democrats believing that it's a tax on the consumer, while Republicans see it as more of a tax on foreign countries.
And you mentioned that in California, immigration is also one of the top issues. And earlier this summer, back in June, protests broke out in the LA area over workplace raids by ICE, and this sparked national demonstrations. But in response to these protests in LA and really against Governor Newsom's wishes, President Trump deployed the National Guard to California. And Newsom called the move a quote, illegal militarization of Los Angeles, and he subsequently sued the Trump administration. How do voters in California then feel about President Trump's immigration policies?
And, not to speak of, the Trump administration's overall immigration policies, but folks in California do not overall think that the mass deportations, are a good thing. 60% say that they are a bad thing. That's about equal with when we asked that question in April, so we don't see much of a change there. 40% say that it's a good thing. As you might expect, again, Democrats overwhelmingly say that it's a bad thing. There is a 60-40 split among independents, so just about lining up with that overall average. But even a fifth of Republicans say that it's a bad thing. So this is certainly not a slam dunk policy in California, but we've seen nationally that this is one of the issues where folks aren't necessarily super comfortable with how the Trump administration has handled deportations. It's one of his lower polling issues and policies. We've seen that nationally, and we've seen that individually in some of these states.
And we've seen Governor Newsom in the past couple of days inject himself into another national story. Republican lawmakers in Texas, we've seen, are in the midst of leading an aggressive redistricting effort. They're trying to pass a redrawn congressional map that, if it were passed, it could potentially flip 5 seats from blue to red in the House. Governor Newsom said that if that goes through, he will retaliate. He will fight fire with fire. Those were his words. And he would redraw the California congressional map. What do voters think about that?
So this was interesting. 33% support redrawing the California congressional map. 25% opposed, but the plurality, 42%, they aren't really sure one way or the other. So I do think that this story has broken through to some degree with the electorate. But folks aren't necessarily, again, this is not an issue where it's a slam dunk for either side. I will say, however, Democrats are by and large support the policy, the proposal to redraw California's maps, but even 28% of Republicans are in support. They are overall opposed to redrawing the maps, but I do think that there's some nuance here. I think there's probably a little bit of confusion among the electorate as to what exactly this means, what exactly it would do. So these were interesting results. I think if we gave it a little bit of time, if they do end up holding a special election to determine this, then we might see these numbers shift. Exactly how, I'm not sure.
It really does seem like Governor Newsom and President Trump are real adversaries. As we said earlier, Newsom did sue the Trump administration. Trump is super critical of Governor Gavin Newsom. I'm curious how their approval ratings stack up in California.
This was also very interesting. So Governor Newsom right now, 44% approve, 38% disapprove. That is a major improvement since we last tested this in April. So in April, he was at 33% approve, 42% disapprove. So that's a negative 11 rating overall. So I do think that some of this more pugnacious rhetoric that we've seen coming from Newsom, I think that that actually is helping his image. And I think that some of the things that he's doing right now, it's resonating with voters in California. You take a look at Trump, on the other hand, he's at 30% approve, 58% disapprove. That is nearly the same as April, very slightly worse. But I think we're seeing the effects here of, two forces up against each other. And the voters in California, overall, they are siding with Governor Newsom.
And that's really interesting because over the past year or so, maybe less than a little bit, Governor Newsom has, we've seen two Governor Newsoms. One, someone who's attempting to make inroads with conservatives, talking to Charlie Kirk, talking to Steve Bannon on his podcast, seeing where they can close the gaps a bit. Then you're seeing this Governor Newsom who's coming out swinging at President Trump and the Trump administration and other Republicans. People have said that this could be him laying the groundwork for a 2028 presidential run. In California, is there appetite for that? I mean, who do they want to see in the race in 2028?
Yeah, I certainly think that groundwork is being laid. That's fair to say. And in California, Newsom holds a lead in the hypothetical Democratic primary ballot for president. 23% support Newsom, 17% for Buttigieg, and then 11% for Harris. Everyone else is under 10% right now. So I think that there is appetite. This is a stark contrast, however, to April when we asked folks whether they think Governor Newsom should run for president. And 60% said that he should not run for president. Now, again, that was asked of the entire electorate, not just Democrats. But it is interesting to see that despite the fact that folks didn't believe that he should run for president, now he's in the lead in California's presidential primary if he does indeed step in.
And we know that California has been a reliably blue state. What about a generic congressional ballot? How are Democrats faring there?
And Democrats are faring well as far as the congressional ballot. 54% would choose a hypothetical Democrat versus 32% for Republicans. That's a really sizable margin there, about 22 points, 15% undecided. Democrats also have a narrow lead among independents with 33% versus 28% for the hypothetical Republican candidate. I think we'll probably see this shift a little bit as we get closer to the 2026 midterm election, but I also don't anticipate that it will drop significantly below a 20% margin, nor do I think it will be close to that 30%.
Well, Matt Taglia, there's certainly a lot to look out for between now and the June 2026 primary. And I know and I hope that you and I can talk about it as we get closer and closer. And I hope that we can talk about other races as well. Matt Taglia, I always appreciate our conversations. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany. Happy to be here.